Before there was fire in human hands, before there was writing, before there was law, there was a mountain. Mount Hermon, ancient texts say, where 200 angels stood and made a pact that would change everything. They weren't supposed to come down, they weren't supposed to touch humanity at all. But according to the Book of Enoch, a text so old and so strange that it was cut from most Bibles yet quoted directly in the Book of Jude, these angels, called the Watchers, descended anyway. And what they brought with them wasn't just rebellion. It was knowledge, forbidden knowledge, the kind that ancient writers believed humanity was never meant to have. Think about that for a second. Not weapons made of stone or bronze that humans slowly figured out over thousands of years of trial and error. Actual instruction, direct transmission. Angels sitting down with early humans and teaching them how to forge metal into blades, how to read the movement of stars, how to whisper words that could bend reality itself. Enoch doesn't describe this vaguely either. It names names. It lists exactly which watcher taught which forbidden science, almost like a curriculum written in the sky and then stolen and brought to earth. If you're listening to this late at night, drifting off somewhere quiet, that's exactly what these stories were built for. Ancient warnings whispered around fires, meant to unsettle you just enough to keep listening. So tell me, where are you right now? And what time is it there? I love reading through the comments. It's wild scrolling through and seeing London at midnight, Toronto right before sunrise, Manila on a lunch break, all listening to the same ancient warning at completely different moments in their day. Now, before we climb this mountain of forbidden teachings together, one small thing. If you're enjoying these deep dives into ancient mysteries, the best way to support the show is by following on Spotify, listening there, and if you've got a spare moment, leaving a 5-star review. It genuinely helps more than you'd think, and the link is right there in the description. Over the next several minutes, we're going to walk through 7 of these forbidden sciences, listed in the exact order Enoch claims the Watchers fell and taught them. Metalworking, enchantments, astrology, weather manipulation, earth omens, each one stranger than the last. Each one, according to ancient tradition, a step further away from what humanity was supposed to know. And by the end you'll understand why some scholars believe this ancient text isn't just mythology. It might be humanity's oldest recorded warning about knowledge itself. Number 1 on this list, and the first watcher to fall, is Azazel. If Enoch's account is accurate, Azazel wasn't just another angel who wandered off the reservation. He was, according to many interpretations of the text, something closer to the ringleader, the one whose name gets mentioned more than any other watcher across the entire Book of Enoch, the one whose crimes seem to warrant a punishment so specific, so brutal, that ancient readers must have understood exactly what kind of transgression they were dealing with. Let's set the scene properly, because context matters here. The Book of Enoch describes 200 watchers descending together, all bound by that oath on Mount Hermon, all equally guilty of breaking the boundary between heaven and earth. But not all of them taught the same things. Enoch's author, whoever that mysterious figure actually was, took the time to break down exactly who taught what. This wasn't random chaos. It was organized, almost bureaucratic in its detail, like someone had gone through and assigned specific curricula to specific angels. And sitting right at the top of that list, first among equals, is Azazel. Now, here's where things get interesting from a historical standpoint. The name Azazel doesn't just appear in Enoch, it shows up in the Hebrew Bible too, specifically in Leviticus, in the description of the Day of Atonement rituals. There's a scapegoat, an actual goat, that gets sent out into the wilderness carrying the sins of the people, and it's sent specifically to Azazel. Scholars have debated for centuries what that name actually meant in that context. Some think it referred to a desert demon, some kind of wilderness spirit that predates even the Watcher tradition. Others think it's simply a place name, a rocky cliff where the goat was pushed off. But when you read Leviticus next to Enoch, it's hard not to wonder if these texts are pointing at the same entity, a being associated with wilderness, exile, and the bearing of humanity's corruption. If that connection holds, and plenty of biblical scholars think it does, then Azazel wasn't invented by the writers of Enoch. He was already lurking in the religious imagination of ancient Israel, a figure dangerous enough to have his name attached to one of the most solemn rituals in the entire Hebrew calendar. Enoch didn't create the myth. Enoch expanded it, gave it a backstory, gave it teeth. So why does Azazel end up at the head of this list of fallen teachers? Part of the answer lies in how Enoch structures its narrative. The text describes the Watchers making their pact under the leadership of a figure named Semjaza, who we'll get to in the next item on this list. But even though Semjaza organizes the descent, it's Azazel who seems to carry the heaviest individual blame once the corruption of humanity is described in detail. There's a reason for that, and it comes down to what exactly Azazel is credited with teaching, which we're about to unpack piece by piece. But before we get into the specifics, it's worth pausing on just how severe Azazel's punishment turns out to be, because punishment in these ancient texts often tells you exactly how seriously the crime was taken. While the other Watchers face various forms of judgment, Azazel gets something uniquely brutal. According to the Book of Enoch, the angel Raphael is instructed to bind Azazel hand and foot, throw him into darkness, and cover him with sharp, jagged rocks in a desert location called Dudale. He's left there, Enoch says, until the day of judgment, when he'll be cast into fire. That's not a light sentence handed out for minor rule breaking. That's the kind of punishment reserved for someone the ancient writers considered uniquely dangerous, uniquely responsible. And this is exactly why so many researchers and theologians who study the Enochian tradition treat Azazel as something like the primary offender among the Watchers. Not necessarily because he descended first. The texts are actually a bit ambiguous about that, but because of the sheer weight of what he introduced to humanity once he arrived. Whatever knowledge Azazel brought down from that mountain, it was considered severe enough, corrupting enough, that later Jewish and early Christian writers kept returning to his name, specifically when they wanted to talk about how civilization got contaminated by things it was never supposed to have. There's also something worth noting about the way Enoch frames this entire narrative. It's not written as pure mythology meant to entertain. It reads more like an indictment, almost a legal document listing charges against specific defendants. Azazel taught this. Semjaza taught that. Each Watcher gets named. Each crime gets specified. This structure suggests the original audience understood these as real transmissions of real knowledge, dangerous enough that the text needed to document precisely where each forbidden skill originated and who was responsible for unleashing it onto an unprepared humanity. So now that we understand who Azazel was within this tradition, and why his name carries so much weight across both Enoch and the wider Hebrew Bible, it's time to look at exactly what he taught. Because according to the text, Azazel's curriculum wasn't abstract or philosophical. It was hands-on, practical, and according to ancient writers, it changed the entire trajectory of human violence. The passage itself is remarkably specific. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. Then it adds something even more important. He showed them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. That last phrase is doing a lot of work, because finding a piece of metal is one thing. Knowing how to turn it into something useful or deadly is something completely different. Think about what metalworking actually requires. You need to recognize the right kind of rock. You need to know where to find it, how to break it apart, how to heat it, how to separate usable metal from useless stone. Then you need to shape it. hammer it, sharpen it, maybe combine it with other materials, attach it to wood, leather, or bone. None of this happens by accident. A sharp stone can be picked up off the ground. A metal blade is the result of a process, a chain of knowledge passed from one person to another. And that, according to Enoch, is the real problem. Azazel didn't merely hand someone a sword, he taught the system behind the sword. Now, historically, humans did develop metalworking over a very long period of time. Archaeology doesn't support the idea that a single mysterious teacher appeared one day and instantly gave the whole world bronze weapons. The earliest people used native copper thousands of years before large-scale metallurgy. Then came the slow discovery that heating certain ores could produce metal. Copper was soft but useful. Eventually people learned that mixing copper with tin created bronze, an alloy harder and more durable than either metal alone. Later, iron changed the equation again. But ancient people didn't have our archaeological timeline. They looked at their own world, a world filled with blades, armor, fortified cities, armies, mines, and organized violence, and they asked a question that still hits hard today. Where did all this come from? How did human beings become capable of killing one another at scale? The Book of Enoch gives a very dark answer. It came from heaven. Or, more precisely, it came from beings who took knowledge that belonged in the divine realm and gave it to humanity before humanity had the wisdom to handle it. That is a recurring theme in ancient literature. Knowledge is never just knowledge. Fire can cook food or burn down a village, a blade can cut wood, butcher an animal, harvest a crop, or open a human body. The material itself is not automatically evil. Enoch's concern seems to be what happens when technical skill outruns moral restraint. Give a frightened, ambitious, angry population better weapons, and you don't just improve their tools. You transform their conflicts. A fight between two people with stones is terrible. A conflict between groups equipped with shields, blades, and armor becomes something else entirely. It becomes organized. It becomes repeatable. It becomes a profession. And notice the weapons Enoch lists: swords, knives, shields, breastplates. That's not just a random collection of sharp objects. It's an entire military ecosystem. The sword is for attack. The shield is for defense. The breastplate protects the warrior's body. The knife can serve in combat, but also in close-range killing, utility work, sacrifice, and daily survival. Taken together, these are the tools of a society where violence has become planned rather than spontaneous. For ancient readers, that would have been terrifying. Because once weapons are specialized, people can specialize too. Someone becomes a smith. Someone becomes an armorer. Someone becomes a soldier. Someone supplies the army. Someone rules the people who cannot defend themselves. Technology starts reorganizing society from the inside. You can almost see why the author placed this teaching near the beginning of humanity's corruption. Metalworking isn't just about making objects, it creates power imbalances. The person with a better blade has an advantage over the person with no blade. The city with bronze weapons has an advantage over the village carrying stone tools. And the ruler who controls the mines, the furnaces, and the weapon makers can control everyone else. If you enjoy these kinds of ancient mysteries, our book on 12 unexplained mysteries is available through the website, and the link is waiting for you in the description. Because the deeper you go into texts like Enoch, the more you realize that ancient people were asking questions we still haven't settled. Does technology make us freer? Or does it simply give our worst impulses more efficient tools? Enoch would probably say both, but it puts the emphasis squarely on the danger. There is another detail here that often gets overlooked. The text says Azazel taught humanity the metals of the earth. Not metals from heaven, metals already buried in the ground beneath their feet. In other words, the forbidden part may not be the raw material itself. The earth had always contained copper, iron, gold, and other ores. The forbidden part was unlocking their potential. That is a subtle distinction, but it matters. Azazel is portrayed less like a creator and more like a revealer. He exposes hidden capacities within creation. He teaches people how to extract power from the world around them. And in Enoch's moral universe, revealing hidden power without also giving humanity the discipline to govern it is catastrophic. It's a little like giving a child access to a forge. The fire is real, the hammer is real, the metal is real. But the ability to make something does not automatically mean you understand what that thing will do once it leaves your hands. And this is where the Watcher's story becomes more than an old tale about rebellious angels. It becomes a warning about civilization itself. Every major leap in human capability carries that same double edge. Better tools can feed more people. Better tools can also equip larger armies. The knowledge to make armor implies the knowledge to make weapons capable of defeating armor. Every defense invites a stronger attack. Every invention starts a race. The author of Enoch looked at that race and saw Azazel standing at the beginning of it. But the list of Azazel's teachings doesn't stop with weapons and furnaces. Once the text moves from what people could make with metal to what they could make of themselves, the accusation takes an even stranger turn. He taught them ornaments, bracelets, decorations, the use of antimony, the beautifying of the eyelids, precious stones, colouring agents. In other words, Azazel's forbidden curriculum did not end at the forge. It moved from the battlefield to the body, and that can sound strange to modern ears. Swords and armour, sure, those are easy to understand as dangerous. But makeup, jewellery, coloured dyes, why would the Book of Enoch place cosmetics in the same indictment as weapons? To answer that, you have to step into the ancient world. Adornment was never only about looking nice. It could signal wealth, status, political power, ritual identity, marriage, mourning, royalty, priesthood, or access to rare trade goods. A bracelet was not just a bracelet if its gold came from a distant mine and only a few people could afford it. A coloured cosmetic was not just colour if creating it required specialised ingredients, skilled preparation, and long-distance exchange. Adornment made social differences visible. You could look at someone and immediately know they belonged to a different class, a different household, a different cult, maybe even a different world. The rich could wear what the poor could not. The powerful could surround themselves with visible proof of power, and those who knew the hidden arts of dye, metal, stone, and pigment possessed knowledge that others depended on. The Book of Enoch seems deeply suspicious of that entire process. The text says Azazel taught humanity the use of antimony, a dark mineral often associated with eye cosmetics in the ancient Near East. Ground and prepared carefully, it could be applied around the eyes in the way later cultures used coal. Archaeologists have found cosmetic palettes, pigment containers, and painted adornments across ancient societies. So this is not some fantasy detail invented out of nowhere. People really did colour their eyes, decorate their bodies, wear beads, polish stones, and display precious materials. But Enoch turns those ordinary practices into evidence of a deeper corruption. Why, one possibility is that the author saw adornment as a form of deception. Cosmetics can alter the face. Jewelry can manufacture an image of wealth. Fine clothing can conceal character. In a world where outward appearance carried enormous social weight, the ability to transform that appearance might have seemed morally dangerous. Picture this. A person is no longer judged only by who they are, what family they come from, or what they have done. Now they can construct a public image. They can make themselves appear more desirable, more important, more powerful, more mysterious. They can turn the body into a message that is not necessarily evil, but it is powerful, and Enoch is a book obsessed with power used without restraint. The same Azazel who reveals how to shape metal into instruments of violence also reveals how to shape the human body into an object of display. On one level, those teachings seem completely unrelated. One creates swords, the other creates beauty, but the author may see a connection. Both are forms of human enhancement. Both give people new ways to influence one another. Both can intensify desire, competition, envy, and domination. A better weapon changes the balance of force. A more elaborate display of beauty or status can change the balance of attraction and social power. That is where the moral controversy begins. For centuries, readers have noticed that the Watcher's story often directs its harshest language toward female adornment and sexual desire. The women who join with the Watchers are central to the story, and the cosmetics taught by Azazel are presented as part of the corruption that follows. Some later interpreters took this as a warning specifically against women wearing makeup or jewelry. But that reading has serious problems. The text's larger target is not simply women, and it is not simply beauty. Azazel is the teacher. The Watchers are the ones who cross boundaries. They are the ones who transmit forbidden knowledge, and the resulting violence, disorder, and corruption spread through the whole human world. Men make weapons, men wage war, rulers consolidate power. Society becomes filled with bloodshed, reducing the story to makeup is bad, misses the scale of the accusation. The real issue may be the transformation of human life into a system of appetite. Appetite for violence, appetite for luxury, appetite for beauty, appetite for status, appetite for things that can never quite satisfy. That is why Azazel becomes such a useful symbol. He is not blamed for creating human desire from nothing. The story assumes that desire was already there. What he does is provide techniques that make desire more intense, more visible, and more difficult to control. Give people weapons and anger gains reach. Give people luxury and envy gains an object. Give people cosmetics and adornment, and attraction can become spectacle, competition, manipulation, or obsession. Again, none of these things must lead there. A necklace can be a gift. Eye paint can be cultural tradition. A beautiful stone can be art. The Book of Enoch is not a neutral anthropology of ancient cosmetics. It is a warning text written by people who believed their world had become morally unrecognizable. And in that warning, adornment becomes a symbol of surfaces overtaking substance. The terrifying thing is that this concern has never really disappeared. We still live in a world where appearance can be manufactured, status can be displayed, and powerful industries can turn insecurity into profit. The tools are different now. The underlying question is not. When does self-expression become self-deception? When does beauty become a language of control? When does a technology that seems harmless begin reshaping the desires of an entire society? Enoch's answer is severe. It traces the problem back to a rebel from heaven named Azazel. But even if you read the story as myth rather than history, its warning remains uncomfortably clear. Human beings are rarely destroyed by knowledge alone. We are endangered by knowledge joined to vanity, power, and desire without wisdom. And Azazel's teachings are only the beginning, because the next Watcher is associated with a different kind of dangerous knowledge, one that reaches beyond metal, ornament, and the visible world into spells, remedies, and the hidden power of roots. Number 2. Semjaza's enchantments and root cuttings. If Azazel represents the dangerous power of metal, weapons, luxury, and outward appearance, Semjaza stands at the center of the Watcher's story itself. He is not just another name in a long list of fallen angels. In the Book of Enoch, Semjaza, sometimes spelled Semjaza in English translations, is presented as their chief, the leader, the one whose decision sets the entire catastrophe in motion. That matters because the Watchers do not fall by accident. They do not simply wander too close to the human world and make one terrible mistake. Enoch describes a group of heavenly beings who see the daughters of men, desire them, and begin discussing something they know they should not do. And Semjaza is the one who voices the fear hanging over all of them. He worries that the others may change their minds. He worries that he alone will be left carrying the punishment for a plan they all secretly want. So he proposes an oath, not a casual promise, a binding pact. According to the text, 200 Watchers swear together on Mount Hermon, committing themselves to the descent. Think about what that scene is doing. This is not temptation as an isolated private act. It is organized rebellion. A group makes a decision, reinforces that decision through an oath, and turns individual desire into collective action. Once they swear together, backing out becomes harder. The oath gives them solidarity. It also gives them guilt. And the mountain itself becomes part of the story. Mount Hermon sits in the far north of the ancient land of Israel, along the region associated today with the borderlands of Lebanon and Syria. It was a real mountain, massive, snow-covered for parts of the year, visible across enormous distances. For ancient people, high mountains were never just geography. They were places where heaven and earth seemed to meet. Places of storms, clouds, strange lights, sacred boundaries, and divine presence. So when Enoch says the Watchers descended on Hermon, the location is not random. The story places the rebellion at a threshold between worlds. Above the ordered realm of heaven, below the vulnerable and violent realm of humanity. And between them, a mountain where beings meant to watch cross a line they were never supposed to cross. That is the first thing to understand about Semjaza. His role is not defined only by what he teaches. It is defined by what he authorizes. He is the figure who turns forbidden desire into a program. He gives the group a common purpose. He helps make the descent irreversible. In modern terms, he is not merely a participant. He is the organizer. And that makes his association with enchantments and root cuttings especially important. The Book of Enoch does not portray forbidden knowledge as random information scattered across the world. It assigns teachings to particular watchers. Azazel reveals one set of arts. Other watchers reveal the movements of stars, signs in the clouds, knowledge of the earth, and celestial patterns. Semjaza, the chief, is associated with knowledge that seems to reach into another hidden layer of reality. Not the visible edge of a sword, not the glitter of a gemstone. Something less obvious, something that can be spoken, prepared, invoked, or drawn from the ground. And that is exactly why later readers found Semjaza so unsettling. There is a difference between seeing power and believing you can access it through secret knowledge. A weapon is visible. You can see who carries it. You can see the damage it causes. But a whispered formula, a ritual practice, or a prepared substance from an unknown plant, those belong to the world of specialists, the world of people who claim to know what others do not. In ancient societies, that kind of knowledge could inspire awe, hope, fear, and suspicion all at once. Someone who understood rare plants might be a healer. Someone who knew prayers and incantations might be called upon in a crisis. Someone who could identify poisons, remedies, or strange natural substances might hold real influence over an entire community. When sickness came, when childbirth became dangerous, when crops failed, when a family feared an unseen curse, people looked for those who claimed access to hidden answers. And every culture has had people like that. Some were skilled observers of nature. Some preserved practical knowledge passed down over generations. Some worked within religious traditions that their communities considered sacred. Others may have been frauds, exploiting fear when people were desperate. The historical reality was complicated. Ancient healing, ritual, herbal practice, and magic often overlapped in ways that do not fit cleanly into our modern categories. The Book of Enoch, however, is not trying to map those categories neutrally. It is trying to explain why the world had become corrupted enough to deserve judgment. That is why Semjaza's place at the top of the Watcher's hierarchy matters so much. The chief does not simply break a rule. He presides over a breach of the boundary between heaven and earth, then becomes associated with teachings that human beings were not supposed to possess. In Enoch's moral universe, the knowledge is dangerous partly because of what it does, but also because of where it comes from. It comes from above, from beings with access to secrets humans were never meant to receive. And before we go further, if these ancient stories make you wonder how many other mysteries survive just beneath the surface of history, there is a book about 12 unexplained mysteries available on the website. The link is in the description, but Semjaza's story gets stranger from here, because the words attached to his name, enchantments and root cuttings, sound simple at first. They are not. Enchantments is the first word, and it carries more weight than it does in modern English. Today, enchantment makes people think of fairy tales. A wand, a glowing spell, maybe a curse spoken in an old language. But in the ancient world, an enchantment was not necessarily theatrical. It could mean a spoken formula, a sequence of sacred names, a chant, an invocation, or a carefully repeated phrase believed to produce an effect in the world. Words were not just descriptions. Words could be actions. A judge's sentence changed a person's fate. An oath bound people together. A blessing could establish status, inheritance, protection, or covenant. A curse could mark someone as excluded, condemned, or exposed to divine punishment. In a world where speech could create real social consequences, it was not hard to imagine that certain words, spoken the right way by the right person at the right moment, might reach even further. Into sickness, into weather, into fertility, into protection from enemies, spirits, misfortune, or death. That is the world behind enchantments. The Book of Enoch does not pause to give us a manual. It does not tell us the exact phrases Semjaza supposedly taught, what language they were spoken in, or what rituals went with them. And that silence matters. Ancient texts often name a dangerous practice without explaining it in detail. The author assumes the audience already recognizes the category. They knew what an incantation was. Across the ancient Near East, people used spoken formulas for all kinds of situations. There were words against fever, words for safe travel, words to protect a mother and child, words placed on amulets, bowls, tablets, doorways, and graves. Some invoked divine beings for protection, some called on angels, spirits, ancestors, or cosmic powers. Some were meant to drive danger away, others were meant to call something in. The line between prayer and enchantment could be very thin. Both might involve sacred words, both might be repeated, both might ask for intervention beyond ordinary human power. But from the perspective of a text like Enoch, the question was not only what was said, it was who gave humans the knowledge, what forces were being addressed, and whether people were trying to seize control over powers that belonged to heaven alone. That is where the anxiety begins. Imagine living in a village where a child becomes sick overnight. No microscope, no germ theory, no reliable diagnosis. You do not know whether the danger came from spoiled food, contaminated water, an insect bite, a hidden injury, or something invisible moving through the household. Someone arrives claiming they know the words that can stop it. Would you reject them, or would you listen? That kind of knowledge could make its keeper enormously important. They might become the person people sought out when ordinary answers failed. And when fear is high, the ability to claim secret knowledge becomes a kind of power all its own. Now add the second phrase, root cuttings. Again, it sounds almost harmless, like someone gathering plants. But the wording is strange. Enoch does not simply say roots, it says the cutting of roots. That suggests more than recognizing useful vegetation. It points toward the specialized act of selecting, digging up, preparing, and perhaps combining the hidden parts of plants. Roots were different from leaves and fruit. They were buried, invisible, hidden beneath the surface of the earth. You had to know where to find them, when to harvest them, which part to take, how much to use, and what happened after they were cut free from the soil. Some roots nourish, some numb pain, some alter consciousness. Some induce vomiting, some can kill, and before anyone understood chemistry, the difference between remedy and poison could come down to a single piece of practical knowledge. The right plant, the right root, the right amount, the right preparation. That is why root cuttings may refer to a body of botanical lore, but not necessarily the ordinary kind. The ancient world did not separate categories the way we do. A plant might be valued for its smell, its colour, its bitterness, its ability to stain fabric, repel insects, cause sleep, produce smoke, or affect the body in ways nobody could fully explain. And if a root seemed to change the body or mind, people could easily connect it to the unseen world. A plant that brought sleep might be thought to open a doorway to dreams. A bitter root that purged the body might be seen as expelling an invading force. A fragrant resin burned in smoke could become an offering, a protection, or a method of purification. The material substance and the spoken formula could work together. You do not just gather the root, you cut it at a particular time. You prepare it in a particular way. You speak particular words over it. And suddenly, what might look like early plant knowledge becomes something much more charged, a technology of hidden forces. There is also a problem of translation. First Enoch survives most fully in Ethiopic, though portions were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in Aramaic, and scholars have spent generations tracing how its language moved across cultures. So we should be cautious about acting as if one English phrase captures every shade of the original meaning. Enchantments and root cuttings are useful translations, but they carry an entire ancient world of ritual, plants, secrecy, and fear behind them. And once you see that, another question becomes impossible to avoid. If Semjaza taught the making of enchantments, who taught people how to undo them? That question leads directly into the world of counter-enchantments. But before we get there, we need to understand what later readers did with Semjaza's forbidden knowledge, because this is where the story becomes more complicated than it first appears. The Book of Enoch does not say that every attempt to heal the sick is evil. Ancient Jewish tradition did not reject healing altogether. Far from it, people used food, oil, bandages, washing, rest, poultices, and plants. Later Jewish texts could even describe healing as a gift that ultimately came from God. So the problem was never simply that someone knew a useful route. The problem was knowledge that crossed a boundary. Knowledge claimed to come from rebellious heavenly beings. Knowledge mixed with secret rituals, hidden names, manipulation of spirits, and the promise that a human being could control sickness, fate, fertility, or death through techniques that had not been authorized by heaven. That distinction may sound abstract, but in the ancient world it could be the difference between care and control. A person gives a sick child water, warmth, and a medicinal plant. That is one thing. A person says the child is sick because an invisible being has entered the house, then demands payment to pronounce a secret formula, burn a particular substance, and force the unseen power to obey them. That is something else entirely. Maybe it works. Maybe the child recovers because many illnesses pass on their own. Maybe the root has a real effect. Maybe the ritual gives the family hope during a terrifying moment. Or maybe nothing happens at all, but the practitioner now has authority. They alone know the hidden words. They alone understand the secret connection between illness and the invisible realm. And if the cure fails, there is always another explanation. The words were spoken incorrectly, the offering was insufficient, the patient lacked faith, some stronger spirit was involved. It is a system that can become impossible to question. Later, Jewish and Christian readers repeatedly returned to that fear, not because they believed plants themselves were corrupt, but because secret healing could become a doorway into forbidden allegiance. The issue was not medicine versus religion. It was whether healing acknowledged God's authority or attempted to bypass it. You can see the tension in ancient stories about healers, exorcists, angels, and demons. Sickness was often understood through more than one lens at once. A wound was a wound, fever was fever, but a sudden illness, a wasting condition, nightmares, infertility, or madness could also be interpreted as evidence that something unseen was at work. And when the cause was unseen, people wanted unseen solutions. That is why incantations survived for centuries, why protective words were written on objects, why certain names were spoken over the sick, why roots, oils, smoke, and prayers could all appear in the same act of healing. The ancient world did not divide pharmacy, religion, psychology, and magic into separate rooms. They were all tangled together. For later interpreters, Semjaza became a warning about that tangled boundary, not a warning that humans should remain ignorant, not a command to abandon the suffering, but a warning about knowledge that promises power without accountability. Knowledge that turns fear into dependence, knowledge that presents itself as sacred while quietly moving devotion away from God and toward the operator, the ritual, the formula, the secret. And that concern did not disappear with the ancient world. Even now, people facing chronic pain, cancer, infertility, grief, or conditions medicine cannot easily cure are especially vulnerable to anyone claiming access to hidden answers. That does not mean every alternative remedy is a fraud, or that every spiritual practice is dangerous. It means desperation creates a market for certainty. The more frightening the problem, the more tempting the promise. One root, one ritual, one hidden name, one person who claims they know what nobody else knows. That is the same human vulnerability Enoch's author seems to be looking at. The Watchers do not merely hand humanity tools. They hand humanity techniques that can be used to exploit fear, blur moral limits, and make the hidden world feel available for purchase. And perhaps that is why the text treats these teachings as part of the great corruption before the flood. Not because healing is wrong, but because power over life and death is never morally neutral when it is wrapped in secrecy. If you want to go deeper into the ancient mysteries that still resist easy answers, our book on 12 unexplained mysteries is available through the website. The link is in the description, but Semjaza's alleged instruction leaves us with one final problem. If people believed curses, harmful words, and ritual attacks could cause suffering, then they would need someone who knew how to break them. And according to Enoch, one Watcher was remembered for teaching exactly that. Number 3. Armaros's Counter-Enchantments. And this is one of the strangest entries in the entire list. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are not presented as one teacher passing down one forbidden science. They are a network, a group of heavenly rebels, each associated with a different kind of knowledge. Azazel teaches weapons, metalworking, ornaments, and cosmetics. Semjaza teaches enchantments and root cuttings. Then comes Armaros, credited with teaching what many translations call the resolving of enchantments. Just a few words, no story about Armaros stepping down from heaven. No speech explaining his methods, no detailed ritual, no description of the first human being who learned from him. The text simply places his name in the list, then moves on. But sometimes the briefest lines are the ones that open the largest questions, because Armaros appears at exactly the point where Enoch's forbidden sciences begin turning inward. Semjaza's teaching is associated with enchantments. Armaros is associated with something that answers them. One watcher teaches a kind of binding. Another teaches something related to breaking that binding. It is almost like the text is showing us an arms race of the unseen world. First comes the threat, then comes the supposed defense. And once both exist, nobody is free from the system anymore. The name itself survives in different forms depending on the manuscript, translation, or later tradition. You may see Armaros, 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 or a similar spelling. This is common with ancient texts. Names moved between languages copied by hand across centuries, carried from Aramaic traditions into Greek, Ethiopic, Latin, and eventually modern English. A single letter could shift. A familiar sound could be written differently by each scribe. So we should be careful about treating every spelling as if it identifies a completely different figure. But however the name is rendered, the role remains remarkably specific. Armaros is not remembered as a great commander, not as the leader of the Watchers. That role belongs to Semjaza in the larger story. He is not the famous corrupter associated with weapons and adornment. That is Azazel. He is not linked to stars, clouds, lunar movements, or signs of the earth, teachings assigned to other Watchers later in the list. Armaros is remembered for one thing: counter-enchantments. That specificity matters. Ancient lists often work like compressed archives. A name could carry an entire tradition that no longer survives. The author may have assumed readers already knew more about Armaros. Or perhaps the mystery was intentional. The Book of Enoch was not trying to preserve every detail of the Watcher's curriculum. It was building a case against them. These beings crossed a boundary between heaven and earth, gave dangerous knowledge to humans, and helped create the corruption that made judgment necessary. The names are evidence in that case. Think about what the list is doing. It is not merely saying, bad angels taught bad things. That would be simple. Instead, it breaks forbidden knowledge into categories: warfare, beauty, incantation, plants, celestial signs. Weather lore, earthly omens. The effect is unsettling. Human civilization begins to look surrounded by hidden systems. The forge, the battlefield, the sick room, the night sky, the storm cloud, the ground beneath your feet. Everywhere people look for power, patterns, and protection. Enoch places a watcher in the background. Not necessarily because the author believed humans could invent nothing on their own, but because the text is asking a deeper question. What happens when knowledge becomes detached from moral limits? Armaros stands right in the middle of that question. Because counter-enchantments sound protective. They sound like the opposite of harm. If someone believes they have been cursed, afflicted, bound, or attacked through invisible means, then the person who can remove that danger may seem like a rescuer. And maybe to a frightened family in the ancient world, that is exactly what he appeared to be. Imagine the situation. A child grows ill without warning. A harvest fails. A woman cannot conceive. A man wakes night after night convinced something is pressing down on his chest. Nobody understands germs, neurological disorders, weather cycles, genetics, or the thousands of natural causes that can shape a human life. The event feels personal, intentional, like someone or something has targeted you. So you search for an answer. not just an explanation. A way out. That is the world in which Armaros's tiny entry becomes much larger than it looks. And that way out had a name in almost every ancient culture. Not always the same name, not always the same ritual, but the basic idea was everywhere. If harm could be sent through words, symbols, hostile spirits, curses, or the envy of another person, then harm could also be sent away. A binding could be loosened, a curse could be turned back, a threatening presence could be driven out. The invisible attack had an invisible answer. That is the world behind the phrase resolving enchantments. It does not necessarily mean Armaros was teaching people to wave their hands and reverse spells like something from a fantasy movie. Ancient counter-magic was usually more practical than that. It could involve spoken formulas, protective names, knots untied in a specific order, water poured over the body, smoke from herbs, written words carried as amulets, or objects buried, broken, burned, or cast into running water. The principle was simple. If a harmful act had created a connection between the victim and the danger, then the ritual had to sever that connection. Think of an enchantment as a rope. Somebody ties it around your life. Maybe around your health, your family, your sleep, your animals, your crops, your future. You cannot see the rope, but you feel its pull. Every setback becomes evidence that it is there. The counter-enchanter claims to know where the knot is, what it was made from, and how to untie it. That makes him extraordinarily powerful. Not because he can simply make pain disappear. Ancient people knew pain did not disappear that easily. But because he can give suffering a shape, he can say, this is not random. This has a cause, it has a name, and because it has a name, it can be confronted. For someone living in fear, that can feel like salvation. And this is where the art becomes much more complicated than it first appears. To resolve an enchantment, you have to understand enchantments. You have to recognize the signs. You have to know the language of the threat, the symbols associated with it, the rules that supposedly govern it. The healer and the caster may look like opposites, but they operate inside the same invisible system. One creates the knot. The other unties it, or claims to. Ancient texts from Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and later Jewish traditions are filled with this kind of thinking. A person suffering from fever, nightmares, infertility, bad luck, or unexplained illness might seek a ritual specialist. The specialist would identify a hostile force, recite words of release, invoke divine protection, and use an object to carry away the affliction. A figurine might represent the enemy. A bowl might hold written curses. A cord might be cut. A disease might be commanded to leave through a doorway into the wilderness, into the sea, or back to the place it came from. The details changed from culture to culture, but the pattern stayed surprisingly consistent. Name the danger. Separate it from the victim. Send it away. There is something deeply human in that sequence. Even now, when we understand viruses, trauma, depression, sleep paralysis, and environmental causes far better than the ancient world did, we still want to name what is hurting us. We still want to separate ourselves from it. We still want to believe there is a door through which it can leave. But in the world of Enoch, this was not just medicine or comfort. It was knowledge with a source, and the source was a watcher. That does not mean the Book of Enoch gives us an actual Armaros ritual manual. It does not. This is important. The text gives us the category, not the instructions. Later readers have sometimes tried to fill in the silence with elaborate systems of angelic names, secret spells and hidden formulas. But those details come from other traditions, later magical texts or modern imagination. The Enochic passage itself remains frustratingly brief. All we can say with confidence is that Armaros was associated with undoing enchantments. Beyond that, we enter a landscape of possibility. Maybe resolving meant releasing someone from a curse. Maybe it meant breaking an oath made through ritual means. Maybe it referred to neutralizing incantations before they took effect. Maybe the phrase had a specialized meaning that ancient readers understood, but that has been lost with the original language and context. And that loss matters, because when a word survives without its full explanation, it becomes a kind of archaeological fragment. Like finding a bronze key without the door it opened. You can tell it was made for something. You can study its shape, compare it to other keys, imagine the lock. But you cannot be completely certain what waited on the other side. Armaros is that kind of key. The more you look at him, the stranger the watcher's list becomes. These are not random lessons handed down to humanity. They form a whole map of vulnerability. Weapons threaten the body. Seduction and adornment can distort desire. Enchantments threaten the mind and spirit. Then counter-enchantments offer relief, but only to those who learn the hidden rules of the danger. And if you want to explore more mysteries like this, our book on 12 unexplained mysteries is available on the website. The link is in the description. Now picture what this knowledge would look like on the ground, not in a heavenly list, but in an ancient village at night. A family has tried everything. The sick person is getting worse. Neighbours whisper that someone has done something. A charm is found near the doorway. A strange mark appears on a wall. Then someone says there is a person who knows how to break what has been done. And that is when the resolving of enchantment stops being an abstract phrase and becomes something far more dangerous. That person might be welcomed like a saviour, or feared like a threat, because the moment someone claims they can break a hidden curse, they are claiming access to hidden power. They are saying they know what ordinary people do not know. They can identify an enemy no one else can see. They can declare that a sickness is not sickness, that an accident is not an accident, that a failed harvest is not weather, that a death in the family is not simply grief. It is evidence, it is an attack, and they know how to answer it. That kind of authority can change an entire community. Imagine two neighbours whose families have argued over land, marriage, animals, or money. Then one household becomes ill, crops fail, a child wakes screaming every night. In a world already primed to see invisible forces behind misfortune, suspicion does not need much encouragement. The counter-enchanter may be asked to help, but help can come with a verdict. Someone did this, and once that accusation enters the village, it is almost impossible to take back. This is one reason counter-magic could remain forbidden even when it appeared protective. It did not merely promise relief, it could create enemies. It could turn anxiety into blame, private suffering into public conflict, and uncertainty into an accusation against a real human being. The person who knows how to break a curse may also claim to know who sent it. That is a dangerous position to occupy. There is another problem. Counter-enchantment does not necessarily reject the magical world of the enchantment. In a strange way, it confirms it. If you go to a specialist to break a curse, you're accepting that curses work, that secret words can bind a life, that ritual objects can carry harm, that certain people possess access to forces outside ordinary human control. The cure keeps the system alive. Think about it like a locked room. A counter-enchanter may offer the key, but by offering the key, he also persuades everyone that the room is real, the lock is real, and that they may need him again the next time they hear something moving behind the door. This is not meant to mock ancient people. Fear is persuasive in every age. When something terrible happens and there is no obvious explanation, people search for patterns. They search for causes. They search for the person who can make chaos understandable. That impulse is ancient. It is still with us. But the Book of Enoch sees a deeper danger in this kind of knowledge. The Watchers are not condemned simply because humans learned useful skills. They are condemned because they crossed a boundary. They revealed things that were not theirs to reveal. Knowledge that gave human beings power over one another, power to manipulate fear, desire, violence, fate, and the unseen. Armaros' teaching belongs to that same pattern. If Azazel's knowledge could make weapons and adornment into instruments of corruption, then counter-enchantments could make vulnerability itself into an instrument. A person terrified of a curse becomes dependent on whoever claims to remove it. A family in pain becomes open to demands, payments, oaths, secrecy, and obedience. The specialist may begin as a healer, but the role can easily become something else. A gatekeeper, and gatekeepers rarely give up their keys. There is a final irony here. In later Jewish religious thought, protection from evil was not rejected. Prayer, repentance, appeals to God, blessings and divine deliverance remained central. The issue was not that people should simply endure suffering without hope. The issue was where they placed their trust. Was protection sought through God, justice, and communal faith, or through secret techniques whose power could not be questioned, tested, or controlled? That distinction mattered. A hidden formula can become a shortcut around moral responsibility. If every hardship is blamed on a curse, then perhaps nobody has to examine disease, bad decisions, injustice, conflict, or the ordinary fragility of life. If every enemy is invisible, then visible wrongdoing can hide in plain sight. And if someone believes they possess the secret knowledge to undo any binding, they may begin to believe there are no limits to what they should be allowed to do. That is the forbidden edge of Armaros' lesson, not the simple human desire to be free from harm, not the hope that pain can end, but the temptation to master the invisible world through techniques passed down outside divine order, to turn fear into power, to make hidden danger the foundation of hidden authority. The Book of Enoch leaves Armaros almost entirely in shadow. We do not get his story. We do not hear his voice. We are given only a name and a disturbing specialty, the one who taught the resolving of enchantments. Maybe that brevity is the point. Some knowledge is dangerous, not because it is completely false, but because it offers certainty where certainty cannot be earned. It tells frightened people that every wound has a secret enemy, every disaster has a hidden hand, and every hidden hand can be controlled by the right person. That promise is hard to resist, and in the Enochic imagination it was one more step in humanity's descent after the Watchers came down from heaven. But the Watchers did not only teach people how to influence what was hidden beneath the surface of life. Some taught them how to read what was written above them, to look into the night sky and believe the stars themselves were revealing secrets. Number 4. Baraqiel's Astrology. After the teachings of weapons, enchantments, and secret remedies, the Book of Enoch lifts our eyes upward. Far above the village, the battlefield, the sickbed, and the hidden curse, there was another realm of knowledge. The sky, Baraqiel, sometimes spelled Baraqiel in different translations, is named as the Watcher who taught humanity astrology. The statement is brief, just a few words, but those few words open up an enormous world, because to ancient people the heavens were not empty. The sun rose with order, the moon changed its face in a pattern. Stars appeared at certain times of year, vanished, and returned. Planets moved differently from the fixed stars, wandering across the darkness with a rhythm of their own. Eclipses came, comets appeared without warning. Certain constellations rose when rains were expected, when animals migrated, when rivers changed, when planting or harvest approached. Every night the sky was performing a pattern, and Baraqiel, according to Enoch, taught people how to read it. Now, it is important to understand what that might have meant in the ancient world. When we hear the word astrology, we may immediately think of modern horoscopes, zodiac signs, personality traits, and daily predictions. But the celestial instruction associated with Baraqiel belongs to a much older and broader idea. It begins with attention. Look up long enough, and the sky becomes a kind of clock. The moon does not merely shine, it counts the passing of nights. The changing position of the sunrise does not merely mark another morning. It tells you the year is turning. A bright star on the eastern horizon before dawn may announce a season before the landscape itself gives any obvious sign. The heavens offer repetition, sequence, and order in a world where life on the ground can be brutally unpredictable. For people without printed calendars, clocks, maps, or weather forecasts, this knowledge could be incredibly powerful. Imagine living in a settlement where survival depends on remembering when the rains usually come, when frost is likely, when grazing animals move, when dangerous heat begins, when a river may rise, or when a journey across open country is safest. The person who understands the cycles above may seem to understand time itself. And time is power. Baraqiel's instruction may have involved the courses of the heavenly bodies, their rising, setting, appearances, disappearances, and recurring positions. It may have included the recognition that the sky was not random, that there were paths in it, gates, seasons, intervals, patterns that returned whether human beings understood them or not. This idea appears everywhere in the wider world of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is fascinated by cosmic order. Its later sections describe the movements of the sun and moon in extraordinary detail. They speak of heavenly gates through which the sun rises and sets, changing lengths of day and night, phases of the moon, winds, clouds, and the structure of the year. Whether those descriptions reflect actual ancient observation, symbolic theology, or a mixture of both, they reveal something important. The authors believed the cosmos had laws. The heavens moved according to an appointed order. The lights above did not wander freely. They had courses assigned to them. They kept times and seasons established by God. That is why the Watcher's teaching is so charged. Baraqiel is not simply presented as someone who pointed at the moon and said, "There it is." He represents the passing down of celestial knowledge from beings associated with heaven to human beings below. In the story's imagination, the sky had its own secrets, and a watcher revealed them. Think about how strange that would feel. For countless generations, people look upward at stars they cannot reach. They can see the patterns, but not fully explain them. Then someone arrives claiming to know the names, movements, and hidden order of those distant lights. Suddenly, the night sky is no longer just beautiful. It is legible. It can be studied. It can be organized. It can be turned into knowledge. And once knowledge can be organized, it can be passed down. One generation teaches another which stars return in which season, which lunar phase follows which part of the horizon matters, which lights move and which remain fixed. A scattered collection of observations becomes a system. That transition is one of the great transformations in human history. The moment people stop merely seeing the heavens and begin building frameworks to explain them. If you enjoy these ancient mysteries, we have a book on 12 unexplained mysteries available on the website. The link is in the description, but in Enoch, celestial knowledge is never merely technical. The sky is too vast for that. To learn its patterns is to come close to questions human beings have always asked. Is the universe ordered? Does time have a design? Are events below connected to powers above? And if the heavens follow laws, who placed those laws there? Baraqiel's lesson begins with that unsettling possibility that the lights over our heads are not silent at all. They are moving through a language most people have never learned to read. And once people believed the sky could be read, the next question was almost unavoidable. What was it saying? This is where astronomy becomes astrology, and where astrology becomes divination. Ancient divination was not usually about asking whether you would meet a tall stranger or have a lucky afternoon. It was about danger, drought, war, disease, famine, the death of a king, the birth of an heir, the outcome of a journey, the future of an entire city. In the ancient world, uncertainty was everywhere. A failed harvest could kill thousands. A military campaign could destroy a kingdom. An eclipse appearing at the wrong moment could terrify an entire population. People wanted warnings before disaster arrived. They wanted signs that the hidden future had already begun to reveal itself. And the heavens seemed like the greatest sign system imaginable. The stars were high above human conflict. The moon moved through its phases, whether armies marched or cities burned. Planets wandered through the night sky with strange, deliberate-looking paths. To ancient observers, this did not look accidental. It looked like a message written on a scale so enormous that only specialists could decode it. Picture this. You are living in an ancient city. There are no weather satellites, no written newspaper, no long-range forecasts. News from a distant kingdom may take weeks or months to arrive, if it arrives at all. Then a brilliant object appears in the sky, a comet, a strange light with a tail stretching across the darkness. Today we know a comet is a body of ice, dust and rock moving through the solar system. But imagine seeing it with ancient eyes. It appears suddenly. It does not belong to the familiar order. It seems to invade the sky. And not long afterward a king dies. A war begins or crops fail. Was that coincidence? Maybe, but human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. We are built to connect events. Sometimes that instinct protects us. If dark clouds gather, seek shelter. If animals flee, pay attention. But sometimes the pattern is harder to prove. A comet appears, then something terrible happens. Did the comet cause it? Did it predict it? Or did people remember the occasions when both occurred, while forgetting all the times a comet came and nothing followed? Ancient astrology grew in that space between observation and fear. The oldest surviving astrological traditions we know in detail developed in Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Babylonian scholars watched the skies for centuries, recording lunar eclipses, planetary movements, unusual cloud formations, and the appearances of stars. Their records were not casual, they could be astonishingly systematic. But their goal was often not personal fortune-telling. It was state divination. If Mars appeared in a certain region of the sky, it might be interpreted as a warning of conflict. If an eclipse happened in a particular month, scholars might fear danger to a ruler or a city. If Venus disappeared and returned at an unusual time, it could be treated as an omen concerning crops, enemies, or political stability. The sky was read like a royal document, and the people reading it held serious power. A court diviner was not simply a mystic making vague predictions. He could be an educated specialist, trained to preserve records, compare earlier events, calculate cycles, and advise kings. In some cases, rulers made real decisions based on celestial omens. They delayed campaigns, performed rituals, offered sacrifices, appointed temporary substitute kings during periods believed to threaten the actual ruler. Think about the pressure of that job. You tell a king that an eclipse means danger. If nothing happens, perhaps the ritual worked. If something terrible happens, perhaps the warning was ignored. Either way, the system can protect itself. The interpretation survives because every outcome can be folded back into the meaning of the sign. That is one reason divination can become so powerful. It gives people a way to act when they cannot control events. It turns terror into procedure. A plague may be incomprehensible, but if it is an omen, there may be a ritual, a response, a person to consult, a sense, however fragile, that the chaos has rules. And this is likely part of what made Baraqiel's alleged teaching so dangerous in the Book of Enoch. Not because ancient people were foolish for watching the sky. They had good reason to watch it. Their survival often depended on careful attention to repeating natural cycles. The problem, from Enoch's perspective, may have been the claim that heavenly patterns could expose hidden outcomes, reveal divine decisions, or grant human beings access to knowledge that was not theirs to possess. Because once a person believes they can read omens, they may begin to see omens everywhere. A storm before a battle, a red moon during a famine, a child born under an eclipse, a planet disappearing behind the sun. None of these events needs to be rare to become meaningful. All they need is a story connecting them to what happens next. And stories spread fast. One village hears that a bright star appeared before a ruler fell. Another hears that an eclipse came before disease. Over generations, scattered memories become traditions. Traditions become tables of signs. Tables of signs become secret knowledge, guarded by priests, scribes, sages, and those who claim they know how to interpret the language above. But there was a problem buried inside this entire system, a problem that would shape the meaning of astrology for thousands of years. Seeing a pattern in the sky is one thing. Deciding that pattern governs the life of a human being is something else entirely. That is the line Baraqiel's teaching appears to cross. Observation says the moon affects the tides. Observation says seasons return. Observation says the position of the sun determines the length of the day, the warmth of the soil, the timing of planting, the migration of animals. These are real connections between heaven and earth. Ancient people did not need modern science to notice them. Their lives depended on noticing them. But fate is a different claim. Fate says the position of Mars at your birth can determine whether you will become violent. Fate says Venus can shape who you love. Fate says an eclipse may decide the future of a king before he makes a single decision. Fate turns the sky from a clock into a command, and that is a massive leap. Think about it. 2 children are born on the same night, beneath the same stars, in the same city, perhaps only minutes apart. One grows up in a palace, educated, protected, surrounded by wealth. The other grows up hungry in a neighborhood where disease, war, or poverty may take away every opportunity before adulthood. If their lives unfold differently, was it written in the sky? Or did power, chance, family, geography, and human choices shape what happened? That question is still with us. Even now, people want to know whether life has a pattern beneath the chaos. We want to believe the universe is not random, that suffering means something, that success was not entirely an accident, that perhaps the future leaves clues for those wise enough to see them. Astrology offers a powerful answer. It says you are not drifting through a meaningless universe. You belong to a cosmic design your birth mattered. The exact moment you entered the world was recorded in the heavens. And if the heavens can be read, then maybe your deepest nature, your greatest danger, even your destiny can be read too. You can see why that idea survived. It gives order to uncertainty. But it can also take something away. Responsibility. If a ruler believes the stars have already declared victory, he may begin a war he otherwise would have avoided. If a person believes they were born under an unlucky sign, they may stop fighting for a better future. If an entire society believes certain births are cursed or favoured, the stars can become an excuse for the way people treat one another. The sky did not create those decisions, people did. But once fate enters the picture, it becomes easy to blame the heavens for what human beings choose. And maybe that is the deeper warning hidden behind Baraqiel's name. The Book of Enoch does not give us a modern argument against astrology. It does not explain gravity, orbital mechanics, or probability. Its concern is theological and moral. The Watchers cross a boundary. They reveal knowledge that gives humanity power, but power without wisdom, and knowledge of the stars becomes dangerous when human beings mistake prediction for authority. There is a difference between saying, "Winter is coming," store grain, and saying, "The stars have judged this child's life before that child has taken a breath." One is careful attention to the world. The other can become a prison. For anyone fascinated by the places where mystery, history, and unanswered questions collide, the book about 12 unexplained mysteries is available on the website, with the link in the description. Because this question, whether the universe sends signs or whether we create meaning from what we see, is one of humanity's oldest mysteries. Now, to be fair, astrology was never one single thing. Across thousands of years, different cultures used it in different ways. Some treated it as court science, some as religious symbolism, some as medicine, timing rituals and treatments according to lunar cycles, some as a tool for personal reflection rather than an unbreakable map of the future. And some ancient thinkers pushed back. They noticed that predictions were often vague. They questioned why people born under the same sky did not live identical lives. They argued that character came from habit, education, and choice. Others believed the stars might influence the physical world without controlling the human soul. That distinction matters. Influence is not destiny. The moon can pull the ocean without deciding where a ship will sail. The sun can bring spring without deciding what a farmer plants. The night sky can mark time without writing the story of every human life beneath it. Yet the temptation remains. When the future feels frightening, certainty is intoxicating. A chart, an omen, a prediction, even a warning can feel safer than admitting that much of life is unknown. Maybe that is why Enoch presents this knowledge as forbidden. Not because the heavens should never be studied, but because the desire to control the hidden future can become endless. First you watch the sky, then you interpret it. Then you believe it speaks directly to you. And eventually you may stop listening to conscience, reason, and consequence, because you think the verdict has already been written above. Baraqiel's alleged lesson leaves us standing at that boundary. Look up, measure the cycles, learn the seasons, stand in awe of the universe. But be careful when observation becomes certainty, because beyond that line, the stars are no longer guiding you through the darkness. They are deciding who you are, and according to the Book of Enoch, that was knowledge, humanity was never meant to possess. Number 5 is Kokabel's knowledge of the constellations. After Baraqiel and the dangerous claim that the sky can reveal destiny, the Book of Enoch takes us one step further. Not just the movement of heavenly bodies, not just omens, cycles, and the search for meaning in the planets. Kokabel is said to have taught humanity the constellations. That sounds almost harmless at first. A constellation is just a pattern, right? A set of stars that only appear connected, because we are standing on one small planet, looking outward from one particular angle. The stars may be separated by unimaginable distances. One may be relatively close, another may be hundreds or thousands of light years farther away. They are not necessarily a group, they do not form a picture in space. We form the picture, and yet, once you see it, it is hard to unsee. A hunter in the stars, a lion, a serpent, a great bear, a woman, a crowned king, a creature with the body of one animal and the head of another. Different cultures looked up at the same darkness, and found different figures waiting there. They connected points of light into stories, and those stories became so powerful that some have outlived the kingdoms, languages, and religions that first told them. According to the Book of Enoch, this was Kokabel's domain. His name is usually translated as something like Star of God or God's Star. The exact meaning is debated because ancient names move through different languages, spellings, manuscripts, and translations. You may see his name written as Kokabel, 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 or Kokabel, but the root is clear enough. It is connected to the ancient Semitic word for star, Kokab, a star, and El, God. So even before Enoch tells us what Kokabel taught, his name places him in the heavens. He is marked by starlight, not the sun, not the moon. Not storms, weapons, or secret roots hidden beneath the soil. His association is with the immense black expanse above the human world, filled with lights that ancient people could see but never reach. There is something fitting about that. The other watchers gave knowledge that could be used immediately. Metal could become a blade, a charm could become a weapon against an enemy. A reading of the planets could influence a king's decision. But Kokabel's lesson begins with something more distant. Something no one can hold in their hands, a pattern in darkness. In 1 Enoch, Kokabel appears among the Watchers, the heavenly beings who descend to earth and teach forbidden arts to human beings. The text is ancient, complex, and preserved through a long history of copying, translation, loss, and rediscovery. It is not a scientific manual, and it does not give us a biography of Kokabel. We do not know what he looked like. We do not know whether later readers imagined him as a single angelic teacher, a symbolic figure, or the personification of an entire kind of knowledge. What the text gives us is a name and a charge. Kokabel taught the constellations. That brief line is almost frustrating. It is like finding the title page of a lost book. You want to know what came next? Which stars did he name? Which shapes did he reveal? Did he teach people to recognize patterns that had always been there? Or did he give them an entirely new way of organizing the sky? The Book of Enoch does not say, but perhaps that silence is part of what makes Kokabel so interesting, because humans had looked at the night sky long before any written book recorded their thoughts. They had watched lights rise, drift, vanish, and return. They had seen bright stars appear at different times of year. They had noticed some points of light move differently from the rest. They had watched darkness consume the world, then watched the heavens fill it with order. But recognizing a light is not the same thing as naming it, and naming it is not the same thing as making it part of a larger pattern. That is the threshold Kokabel seems to represent, not merely seeing stars. Seeing figures, seeing relationships, seeing a map where there had once been scattered lights. And once the sky becomes a map, human beings can begin to ask a much more dangerous question. If those patterns are up there every night waiting to be read, what else might they be telling us? For ancient people, the constellations were not decorations on the ceiling of the world. They were a library, not a library made of books, because books came much later. This was a library you carried in memory, a library that opened only after sunset. Its pages were black, its letters were white fire, and every culture that spent enough generations under a dark sky began reading it in its own way. This is important because there is no single original set of constellations shared by all humanity. The familiar figures most people know today, Orion, Taurus, Gemini, Andromeda, were shaped by Greek and Mesopotamian traditions, then preserved through later Roman, Islamic, and European astronomy. But those were never the only stories in the stars. Across the world, people found different images in the same lights. Where one tradition saw a great hunter, Another might see a line of animals, a canoe, a net, a pathway, or a family of ancestral beings. The stars we call the Big Dipper, for example, have been imagined as a bear in parts of Europe and North America. But elsewhere they became a wagon, a ladle, a group of mourners, or a hunting party. Same stars, different world. That tells us something profound. Constellations are not simply discovered like a mountain or a river. They are created through attention, through memory, through generations of people looking upward and agreeing. This group of lights means something. This is where Kokabel's teaching becomes more than a list of star names. To teach the constellations would be to teach human beings how to organize the overwhelming. Imagine standing beneath a truly dark sky with no cities, no electric lights, no satellites crossing overhead, no screens pulling your eyes downward. The Milky Way would stretch from horizon to horizon like a river of powdered light. Thousands of stars would be visible, some bright enough to command attention, others so faint they seemed to appear only when you looked away. Without a system, it would be chaos. But give those lights names. Connect them into figures. Attach stories to the figures. And suddenly the chaos becomes memorable. The sky has structure. That may sound obvious now. We grow up with star charts, planetarium apps, maps, science textbooks. We inherit thousands of years of accumulated sky knowledge before we are old enough to question it. But for the ancient world, this act of organizing the heavens was a major intellectual achievement. It required careful observation. It required people who remembered what elders had taught them. It required language precise enough to preserve the difference between one star group and another. And it required imagination, because the lines between stars are not really there. Human beings supplied the lines. That is why constellation knowledge sits at the strange border between science, storytelling, religion, and survival. It is empirical in one sense. The stars are real. Their positions can be observed. Their recurring appearance can be remembered. But the bear, the hunter, the dragon, the maiden, those are human interpretations placed across vast distances. We looked into the darkness and gave it a face. And once a people gave the sky a face, they could pass that vision down. A child could learn a story about a hunter chasing prey across the heavens. Years later, that same child could look up and recognize the shape without needing a written diagram. The story was not separate from the knowledge. The story was how the knowledge survived. That is one reason ancient sky traditions can be so difficult to reconstruct. Much of this information was transmitted orally. It lived in songs, ceremonies, seasonal gatherings, family instruction, and myths that were never meant to be frozen on a page. When languages disappeared or communities were destroyed, entire maps of the sky could disappear with them. Not the stars themselves, the meaning of the stars. And that loss matters, because when modern people talk about the ancient constellations, we often mean the constellations preserved by the civilizations whose texts survived. Babylonian tablets, Greek poems, Roman catalogues, later Arabic astronomical works. Those records are invaluable, but they are only part of the human story of the sky. There were countless other systems. Some still survive in living traditions. Others remain only in fragments, hints preserved in rock art, oral histories, old place names, or the reports of outsiders who did not always understand what they were being told. Researchers have sometimes tried to identify constellations in prehistoric cave paintings or carved stones. A cluster of marks may resemble a known star group. An animal figure may seem aligned with a particular set of lights. These ideas are fascinating, but they are also disputed. A pattern can be real, or it can be our modern mind doing exactly what ancient minds did, connecting dots and seeing a picture. We have to be careful not to turn every ancient image into a star map. Still, the basic fact remains, Long before telescopes, long before formal astronomy, people possessed detailed knowledge of the night sky. Indigenous navigators across the Pacific memorized enormous star paths over open ocean. Desert communities used the heavens alongside landmarks and oral geography. Farmers, herders, hunters and travellers all had reasons to know what appeared above them. The sky was not distant, it was part of the world they lived in, and perhaps that is what makes Enoch's accusation feel so unsettling. Kokabel did not just reveal lights in the darkness. He revealed a system for reading them, a way to turn the silent heavens into recognizable forms, and recognizable forms into knowledge that could be carried from one generation to the next. If you want to explore more mysteries where ancient texts, lost history, and unanswered questions collide, there's a book on the website covering 12 unexplained mysteries. The link is in the description. But Constellations did more than preserve stories. Once people had divided the sky into familiar regions, they could begin to compare what they saw with what they experienced below. And that is where a map of stars could become something far more powerful. Once the sky had been organized into recognizable regions, it could be used to measure time. Not with clocks, not with printed calendars hanging on a wall, but with appearances, disappearances and returns. A particular star rising just before dawn, a constellation vanishing behind the sun for part of the year, the moon reaching a familiar phase while a known cluster stood in a certain part of the sky. These were markers, signals that the world below was entering another season. For farming communities, that could mean everything. Plant too early and the seed may rot in cold soil. Plant too late and the rains may fail before the crop matures. Move herds at the wrong time and animals may find no pasture. Set out on a journey after the seasonal winds have changed and you could die far from home. So people watched. In ancient Egypt, the rising of Sirius near the dawn horizon became closely associated with the coming inundation of the Nile. The appearance did not cause the flood. That distinction matters. But it arrived at roughly the same part of the year, making it a powerful seasonal sign. Over generations, observers could connect a light in the sky with a transformation on Earth. The river would rise, fields would be renewed, planting would begin again. In Mesopotamia, priests and scribes kept detailed astronomical records. They tracked the movements of the moon, planets, eclipses and stars with astonishing persistence. Some of this knowledge served practical purposes, especially calendar making. Lunar months had to be reconciled with the solar year. Festivals, taxes, planting cycles, royal duties all depended on knowing when one season ended and another began. But this is where the story takes a darker turn, because once people realized the sky could reveal regular patterns, many began asking a more dangerous question. If the heavens can tell us when something will happen, can they tell us what will happen? That is the leap from observation to omen, a bright planet appearing in an unusual position, a comet blazing across the darkness, a lunar eclipse staining the moon red. To modern eyes, these events have natural explanations. We can calculate them centuries in advance, but imagine seeing one without that framework. Imagine believing the sky was a living order above the human world, an order inhabited by divine beings, ancestors, powers, or angels. An eclipse would not feel like a shadow moving across a rock in space. It would feel like the universe had spoken. Ancient omen texts from Mesopotamia preserve this mindset in extraordinary detail. A particular arrangement of the moon might be linked to war. A strange halo around the sun might be linked to famine. An eclipse occurring in one month rather than another could be read as danger for a king, a city, or an enemy nation. These were not random superstitions made up in a single night. They became systems. vast catalogues of observed signs and predicted outcomes, copied and expanded across generations. And there was a kind of logic behind it, not scientific logic in the modern sense, but pattern logic. If a strange event in the sky happened before disaster, perhaps it was a warning. If the same event appeared before a victory, perhaps it foretold success. Human beings are built to search for connections, especially when the stakes are high. We see the storm clouds gather, we remember the flood. We see the red moon, we remember the battle. And eventually, memory becomes tradition. Tradition becomes authority, but there is a problem. The human mind is very good at remembering the apparent hits and forgetting the misses. A comet appears, and something terrible happens somewhere in a vast empire. That feels meaningful, but comets can appear without a kingdom falling. Kingdoms can fall without comets. The connection may be emotionally powerful without being physically real. Still, in the ancient world, celestial omens could shape real decisions. Kings consulted diviners. Armies delayed campaigns. Rituals were performed to avert disaster. In some Mesopotamian traditions, an eclipse threatening the king could lead to the extraordinary ritual of the substitute king. A temporary stand-in would be installed to absorb the danger while the real ruler stayed hidden until the threatening period had passed. Think about that. A shadow crossing the moon could alter the behavior of an empire. This is why the knowledge attributed to Kokabel could be seen as forbidden. Not because recognizing stars is evil, not because making a calendar is corrupt. Calendar knowledge made life more stable. It helped communities coordinate labor, preserve ceremonies, and survive seasonal change. The danger was in claiming mastery over meaning. The sky could become a calendar. Then a calendar could become a sacred code. And a sacred code could become a tool of power, controlled by those who said they alone could interpret what the heavens wanted. That tension runs through the Book of Enoch. The Watchers do not merely hand humanity useful skills. Their teachings blur boundaries. They give people access to knowledge that may belong to a higher order, knowledge capable of changing how humans see themselves and how they act. With the constellations, the gift was a pattern. With calendars, that pattern became control over time. With omens, it became a claim to glimpse the future. And perhaps that is the real warning beneath Kokabel's lesson. The stars do have patterns. Seasons do return. The moon does change in cycles. But the moment we turn every light above us into a message about our private fate, we may stop observing the world and start projecting our fears onto it. Yet the sky was not finished teaching humanity. The stars marked the long rhythms of the year, but closer to Earth, another shifting realm carried signs that were immediate, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. The clouds. Number 6. Ezeqeel's law of the clouds. After the fixed patterns of stars and constellations, the Book of Enoch turns towards something far less stable. Clouds. They form without warning. They change shape by the minute. They gather on a clear horizon, darken the land, release rain, lightning, hail, or nothing at all, then dissolve as if they had never been there. And according to the Watcher's list in 1st Enoch, one fallen angel taught humanity knowledge connected to them. His name is usually given as Ezeqeel. The reference is short, almost painfully short, in the passage commonly numbered 1st Enoch chapter 8. The rebellious Watchers distribute their teachings among human beings. Azazel teaches metalworking, weapons, and ornament. Semjaza teaches enchantments and root cuttings. Other Watchers are assigned to heavenly signs, the course of the moon, the signs of the earth, and the sun. Then comes Ezeqeel. He taught the knowledge of the clouds. That is all the text gives us. No story about the first lesson. No ancient student standing beneath a storm. No list of named cloud formations. No instruction manual preserved beside the verse. just a name, a subject, and a silence that has lasted for more than 2,000 years. But even that brief line matters because it appears inside one of the most important sections of the Enochic tradition. First Enoch is not one book written at one moment by one author. It is a collection of ancient Jewish writings assembled over time. Its earliest parts were composed centuries before the Common Era, and the section containing the Watchers, often called the Book of the Watchers, is generally considered among its oldest material. This is the story in which heavenly beings descend, take human wives, produce giants, and reveal knowledge that humans were not supposed to possess. The ancient manuscripts do not all survive equally well. That is one of the great frustrations of studying Enoch. The most complete version of First Enoch survives in Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia. Ethiopian Christian tradition preserved the book when it was lost from most Jewish and Christian collections elsewhere. The surviving Ge'ez manuscripts are much later copies, but they preserve a work whose roots are far older. Then, in the 20th century, something remarkable happened. Fragments of First Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. These were written in Aramaic, the language spoken widely in Judea during the Second Temple period. Their discovery proved that Enoch was not some late medieval invention preserved only in Ethiopia. It was known, copied, and treated seriously in Jewish communities more than 2,000 years ago. But fragments are not complete books. Imagine finding the burned edges of an ancient library. You can identify portions of sentences. You can recognize a familiar chapter. You can confirm that a text existed, but there are still gaps. Lines vanish. Names are damaged. Whole sections may survive in one language, but not another. That means Ezeqeel's tiny sentence comes to us through a complicated chain of preservation. The full Watcher list is known chiefly through the Ethiopic text. Greek excerpts also preserve parts of First Enoch, including material transmitted by later writers. And the Aramaic Qumran fragments confirm the deep antiquity of the Book of the Watchers as a whole, even where they do not preserve every line we would most like to inspect. So when we say Ezeqeel taught the knowledge of the clouds, we should be precise. We are not quoting an original manuscript written by Ezekiel's contemporaries, assuming such a figure ever existed outside the story. We are reading a line preserved through generations of scribes, translators, communities, and manuscripts. A line from an ancient religious text whose transmission is real, but whose earliest physical copies are incomplete. And even the name itself reminds us how unstable ancient texts can be. Depending on the translation, spelling system, or manuscript tradition, names from Enoch can look different on the page. Ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Ge'ez do not map neatly onto modern English letters. A single watcher may appear under slightly different spellings in different editions. Ezeqeel is the form many modern translations use, but the underlying tradition has passed through several languages before reaching us. That might sound like a minor detail. It is not. Names carried authority. In the Watcher's narrative, each forbidden science is assigned to a specific heavenly instructor. Knowledge does not simply appear, it descends. It has a source, and that source is blamed for changing the human world. If you want to go deeper into ancient mysteries like this, our book on 12 Unexplained Mysteries is available on the website. The link is in the description, but Ezeqeel's place in the list raises an immediate question. Why clouds? Why would a text that condemns weapons, sorcery, celestial signs, and hidden law make room for this shifting layer of vapour above the earth? To understand that, we have to step into a world where the sky was not empty space. It was a boundary, a moving border between the human realm below and the powers believed to exist above. For people living before forecasts, satellites, radar, or even written calendars, Clouds were not background scenery. They were information. A dark bank rising in the west could mean rain before nightfall. High, thin streaks spreading across a clear sky could mean that weather was changing somewhere beyond the horizon. Low grey sheets moving fast might warn of cold wind. Towering clouds climbing upward in the heat of the day could mean thunder, flash floods, and dangerous lightning before sunset. None of this required magic. It required attention. A shepherd who spent every day outside noticed things a city dweller might miss. The direction clouds moved, the way morning mist settled in valleys, the strange stillness before a storm, birds flying low, wind changing temperature against the skin, the smell of rain on dry ground before the first drops even fell. Over generations, observations like these became traditional knowledge. Parents taught children, sailors taught crews, farmers watched the horizon before planting seed or bringing in a harvest. A wrong decision could cost more than comfort. It could mean drowned animals, ruined grain, a failed journey, or starvation during the winter. So cloud reading was useful, very useful. But in the ancient world, useful knowledge and sacred knowledge were not separated the way they often are today. You didn't necessarily say this is weather, and that is religion. The weather itself could be a message. Rain sustained life. Drought destroyed it. Lightning struck from above. Storm clouds covered the sun, turned day into darkness, and released water that no human ruler could command, that made the sky a place of power. Think about what a storm looks like without modern explanations. You see enormous black forms rolling over the land. You hear a sound like mountains breaking apart, fire flashes inside the clouds. Then water falls from a sky that moments earlier looked empty. Even today, that can feel overwhelming. In the ancient Near East, it was easy to see why storms were linked with divine beings. Across the region, gods were imagined as riders of clouds, masters of thunder, or rulers who opened the storehouses of rain. In the Hebrew Bible itself, clouds repeatedly appear around moments of divine presence. A cloud leads Israel through the wilderness. A cloud covers Mount Sinai. The cloud fills the sanctuary. The heavens are not merely physical space. They are a theatre where divine authority becomes visible, and that is where Ezeqeel's teaching takes on a darker edge. If clouds could reveal the approach of rain, that was practical skill. But if their shapes, movements, colours and timing could reveal hidden intentions, coming disasters or the will of powers above, then cloud watching became something more than weather observation. It became omen reading. Imagine a farmer seeing clouds gather at an unusual season. Is it only a storm system, or is it a warning? Imagine a king preparing for battle as a strange red dawn spreads beneath a layer of cloud. Is it simply dust and sunlight, or does it predict bloodshed? Imagine a community watching a ring around the moon, a cloudless heat, then a sudden violent storm. In a world built on signs, none of these events had to be random. The question was not just, what weather is coming? The question was, what does it mean? Ancient peoples developed elaborate systems for asking that question. Mesopotamian scholars recorded eclipses, winds, rain, thunder, and unusual appearances in the sky. They compared events with earlier records, looking for patterns between heavenly phenomena and what happened on Earth. A storm in one direction, thunder on a particular day, clouds appearing in a certain part of the sky. These could all become pieces of a vast interpretive system. Not science in the modern sense, but not blind guessing either. It was an attempt to turn uncertainty into knowledge. And that impulse is completely human. When danger is coming, people want advance notice. When crops depend on rain, they want to know whether the heavens will open. When a kingdom faces war, disease, or famine, rulers want signs that tell them what happens next. Clouds offered the perfect surface for those hopes and fears. They were visible to everyone but never fully predictable. They changed constantly, inviting interpretation. One person saw vapour and wind. Another saw a warning written across the sky. The Book of Enoch places this kind of knowledge among teachings delivered by rebellious watchers. That placement matters because the larger story is not simply about people learning new skills. It is about boundaries being crossed. Heavenly beings reveal knowledge. Human beings receive it, and the result, according to the narrative, is not wisdom and stability. It is corruption, violence, and a world moving toward judgment. So picture the ancient observer beneath a gathering storm. He is not holding a barometer, he has no weather map. He has memory, inherited sayings, fear, experience, and perhaps a growing conviction that the clouds are speaking. But if the sky speaks, who exactly is speaking through it? And that is the problem. The Book of Enoch gives us the phrase, but it does not give us the instruction manual. Ezeqeel is said to have taught the knowledge of the clouds, or the signs of the clouds, depending on the translation. But what did that actually mean to the people who first heard this story? We cannot be completely sure. The surviving text is brief, almost frustratingly brief. It gives Ezeqeel a name and a field of forbidden knowledge, then moves on. No list of cloud types, no explanations of which formations meant danger, blessing, war, famine, or rain. No ancient diagram showing the initiate how to read the sky. Just a cryptic phrase sitting among other teachings associated with the Watchers. That silence has created room for several possibilities. The simplest explanation is that Ezeqeel taught advanced weather knowledge. Not modern meteorology, obviously, no instruments, no mathematical models, no understanding of pressure systems moving across continents. But perhaps an organized body of observations that allowed people to predict conditions with unusual accuracy. That would have been valuable. And in a world where survival depended on harvests, travel, grazing land, and seasonal rain, valuable knowledge could easily become mysterious knowledge. But the Book of Enoch does not present these teachings as harmless improvements to human life. It places them in a catalogue of dangerous revelations. That suggests the author may have had something more troubling in mind. Maybe Ezekiel's lesson was not about forecasting storms. Maybe it was about divination through clouds, reading not just what would happen in the atmosphere, but what would happen in human affairs. And there is an important difference. Predicting rain is one thing. Claiming to know the future of kings, nations, births, deaths, wars, and disasters from the movement of clouds is something else entirely, that crosses from observation into authority. The person who can supposedly interpret the sky becomes more than a farmer or sailor. He becomes an interpreter of hidden reality. He can say, "The heavens have warned us." He can say, "This battle will fail." He can say, "The gods are angry." And once people believe those claims, cloud law becomes power. Maybe that is why Enoch treats it as forbidden. The concern may not have been clouds themselves. It may have been the human desire to force certainty out of a world that refuses to be certain, because that desire can become dangerous fast. When people are afraid, they look for patterns. When events feel random, they want to believe someone can decode them. A failed harvest, an eclipse, a strange storm, a comet, a sudden illness. None of it has to remain meaningless if there is a system behind it. The right expert, the right priest, the right diviner can explain what it all means, or claim to, and that is where ancient wisdom can blur into manipulation. A cloud reader might begin with genuine observations, then add inherited tradition, then add sacred interpretation. Then add fear. Before long, every unusual sky becomes proof of an invisible message, and every disaster confirms the authority of the person claiming to understand it. If you enjoy mysteries like this, the book about 12 unexplained mysteries is available on the website, and the link is in the description. Because Ezeqeel's cloud lore belongs to a much bigger question. How did ancient people decide where nature ended and the supernatural began? There is also another possibility. The clouds may have been symbolic. In ancient religious language, clouds were often connected with the hidden realm above humanity. They concealed the divine presence. They marked the boundary between heaven and earth. To know the signs of the clouds could mean learning how to interpret messages from that boundary, understanding movements in the heavens that ordinary people were not supposed to understand. In that reading, Ezeqeel was not simply a weather teacher or an omen reader. He was a revealer of celestial secrets. But again, the text does not say enough for us to prove it. That uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It may be part of what makes the story effective. A clear list can be checked. A cryptic teaching can grow. It can absorb the fears of every later reader who wonders whether the sky is only sky or whether something watches from behind it. The Book of Enoch leaves Ezeqeel standing in that uncertainty. His knowledge is close enough to ordinary experience that everyone understands the temptation. Look up, watch carefully, notice the patterns, try to know what comes next. But it is also close enough to forbidden revelation that the act of looking becomes spiritually dangerous. And maybe that was the warning all along. Not that clouds are evil, not that weather knowledge is corruption, but that human beings are always tempted to turn observation into certainty, certainty into prophecy, and prophecy into control. The sky offers signs, or at least it seems to, but the next watcher turns our attention away from the clouds entirely. Down from heaven, down toward the ground beneath human feet, where another forbidden science claimed to reveal messages hidden in the earth itself. Number 7 is Araqiel, the watcher said to have taught the signs of the earth. And after the knowledge of clouds, the placement feels deliberate. The list has been moving through a world filled with hidden patterns. First came metalworking and weapons, then enchantments, medicines and counter-enchantments. Then the sky, the stars, the constellations, the clouds. Each teaching offered human beings a way to see more, predict more, or control more than they could before. Now the Book of Enoch brings the secret down to the ground. Araqiel appears in the same compact catalogue of Watcher teachings found in 1 Enoch chapter 8. The wording changes slightly between translations, as ancient texts often do, but the basic claim remains remarkably consistent. Araqiel taught humanity the signs of the earth, just one line, one name, one forbidden field of knowledge, no speech from Araqiel. No story of the first person receiving the lesson. No description of a mountain opening, a river changing course, a stone marked with a warning, or an earthquake announcing judgment. The text simply names him, assigns him this knowledge, and continues. But where Araqiel appears matters. He is not introduced as the leader of the Watchers. That role belongs to Semjaza, the figure associated with the oath on Mount Hermon. Nor is Araqiel given the special attention reserved for Azazel, whose teachings about weapons, adornment and corruption receive a longer and much darker treatment. Araqiel stands deeper in the list, among the Watchers whose names are attached to highly specific branches of knowledge. That makes him easy to overlook, and yet his position may be exactly what makes him important. By the time Araqiel appears, the catalogue has already established its pattern. These are not random skills. They are presented as revelations that human beings were not meant to possess, at least not in this form and not from these teachers. The Watchers do not merely show people how to survive. They give them systems, methods, ways of interpreting the world as if nature itself were full of readable information. Baraqiel gives knowledge associated with the stars. Kokabel gives knowledge associated with the constellations. Ezeqeel gives knowledge associated with clouds. Then Araqiel gives the signs of the earth. Look at the structure. Above, between heaven and earth. Then below, the heavens had their signals, the atmosphere had its signals. And now the land itself had signals, for an ancient audience, that would have made the world feel almost completely alive with messages. Nothing was merely there. The stars could be read. The sky could be read, the clouds could be read, and, according to Araqiel's forbidden instruction, even the earth beneath human feet could be read. That is a powerful idea. It turns the natural world into something like a text, a vast surface covered in clues, warnings, and patterns. And the person who knows how to interpret those patterns gains an advantage over everyone else. Maybe he knows where danger is coming from. Maybe he knows when to travel. Maybe he knows which place is safe, which place is cursed, which direction brings disaster, which event carries a message. Whatever Araqiel's lesson involved, the Book of Enoch places it inside a larger accusation. The Watchers crossed a boundary. They descended from heaven, took human wives, and revealed mysteries that changed human society. Their knowledge was not neutral because it did not remain neutral. In the Enochic story, secret knowledge spreads. It becomes power, and power becomes corruption. That framework is important, because modern readers can make a mistake here. We might see a phrase like signs of the earth and assume it means primitive science, harmless observation, early geography, or practical knowledge learned by careful people over generations. Maybe it did involve careful observation, but the story is not written as a history of human discovery. It is written as an explanation for why the world became disordered. The Book of Enoch imagines forbidden knowledge arriving from outside the human realm. Skills that should have developed slowly, cautiously within the limits of ordinary life are suddenly delivered by beings who know too much. The result is not enlightenment. It is acceleration. Humanity gets more capable before it gets wiser, and that is the thread running through Araqiel's place in the list. His teaching arrives after the Sky Watchers, after the Cloud Reader, as if the catalogue is closing in on every level of reality. Heaven has signs, air has signs, earth has signs, the entire cosmos becomes available to interpretation. But what exactly did ancient readers think those earthly signs were? That is where Araqiel's single line opens into a much larger mystery. One possibility is that Araqiel taught something close to geography. Not geography in the modern sense, with maps, coordinates, satellite images, and borders drawn in straight lines. Ancient geography was more immediate than that. It was knowledge of terrain, where the rivers ran, which valleys flooded, where mountain passes opened and closed with the seasons, which routes led to water, pasture, trade, enemies, or death. To know the signs of the earth could mean knowing how to read a landscape before the landscape killed you. A traveller crosses dry ground and sees a certain kind of grass. That may mean water lies beneath the surface. He finds smooth stones far from a river. That may mean flood water comes through this valley when the rains arrive. She sees cracks in a hillside, trees leaning at strange angles, loose earth beneath a cliff. That may mean the ground is unstable. A settlement notices the same birds leaving an area year after year, or animals refusing to graze near a particular ravine. Maybe they learn that the place is dangerous. Maybe it floods. Maybe poisonous gas rises there. Maybe the animals simply know something people do not. For people living close to the land, those details were not trivia. They were survival. The earth was never silent. It left tracks everywhere, in the shape of hills, in the colour of soil, in the behaviour of water, in the plants that appeared and disappeared, in the way the ground cracked during drought and softened before rain. And if Araqiel taught people how to recognise such patterns, then his knowledge would have been enormously useful. It could tell a group where to build, where to plant, where to hunt, where to dig, and where never to sleep. Think about what that means in a world without weather reports, road signs, engineering surveys, or written maps. One person who can read the ground better than everyone else can become indispensable. He can guide caravans through hostile country. He can find the safest route around a mountain. He can identify land that will support crops. He can warn that a riverbed dry today will become a wall of water tomorrow. That kind of knowledge creates status fast, and status becomes power. But there is another possibility. The signs of the earth may refer not just to practical features of the landscape, but to omens. Events in nature understood as messages, a tremor beneath the feet, a sinkhole opening near a city, a spring suddenly drying up, strange cracks appearing in the soil, stones falling from the sky, a mountain sending smoke into the air. To modern minds, these things invite explanation. Geological pressure, seasonal change, volcanic activity, erosion, drought, meteor impacts. But in the ancient world, explanation and meaning were often joined together. An earthquake was not only an earthquake, it might be a warning. A failed harvest was not only a failed harvest, it might reveal that something had gone wrong between the human world and the divine one. The earth could seem like a living witness, reacting to violence, injustice, broken oaths, or approaching judgment. And the Book of Enoch is exactly the kind of text where that idea makes sense. Its world is morally charged. Heaven notices what happens on earth. Angels cross boundaries. Human beings become corrupt. The land itself suffers under the weight of bloodshed and violence. Nature is not presented as a machine running without purpose. It is part of a cosmic order. When that order is violated, creation can answer back. So Araqiel's lesson may have been the ability to identify those answers. Imagine the fear that could create. A rumble comes from beneath the ground. Most people panic, but someone claims to know what it means. A river changes direction. A field produces a strange crop. A landslide destroys one house but spares another. And suddenly there is an interpreter, a person who can say, "This is not random. This is a sign." That person does not merely possess information. He possesses authority over uncertainty. He can tell people when danger is coming, or claim that he can. He can tell a king that the land approves of his rule, or that the land condemns it. He can point to a disaster and make it evidence for whatever cause he serves. That is where an apparently simple teaching becomes dangerous. Reading signs can help people survive, but it can also let someone turn fear into obedience. There is one more possibility, and it may be the broadest of all. The signs of the earth could refer to natural phenomena themselves: earthquakes, fissures, eruptions, unusual springs, changing seasons, patterns in soil, the behaviour of animals, and the strange events that made ancient people feel they were standing on a world far less stable than it looked. We take stable ground for granted. We walk across streets, floors, fields and mountains assuming the earth is solid and dependable. But ancient communities knew better. They lived with droughts that erased whole harvests, floods that transformed valleys overnight, earthquakes that could collapse homes with no warning, volcanic regions where smoke rose from the ground as if something beneath the world were breathing. The earth could feed you, it could bury you, and sometimes it could do both in the same season. If you enjoy these hidden layers of ancient mystery, the book about 12 unexplained mysteries is available on the website, with the link in the description. Because once you start looking at texts like Enoch, you realize how often ancient people saw the world as a place full of clues. Not clues in the modern detective sense. Not always facts waiting to be measured. Sometimes warnings, sometimes patterns, sometimes messages written into the ground itself. And that raises an unsettling question. If Araqiel taught people to read the earth, was he giving them a deeper understanding of nature? Or was he teaching them to see meaning where no human being should claim the right to see it? And that is exactly why the phrase remains debated. Not because scholars have ignored it, not because there is no interest in it, but because the Book of Enoch gives us almost nothing to work with. Araqiel is named, his teaching is named, and then the text moves on. No definition, no example, no story showing him instructing human beings. No surviving manual explaining what the signs were, how they were read, or why this knowledge was forbidden. Just a few words, the signs of the earth. That is the problem. Ancient texts can preserve enormous mysteries inside tiny phrases. A modern reader wants a clear category. Is this geology? Divination? Geography? Agriculture? Weather prediction? Sacred omens? We want to put Araqiel's teaching into one box, give it a label, and move on. But the ancient world did not always divide knowledge that way. To us, an earthquake belongs to geology, a strange pattern in the sky belongs to astronomy. A failed crop belongs to agriculture. A disaster interpreted as divine judgment belongs to religion. 4 separate subjects, 4 separate bookshelves. But for an ancient observer, these things could be part of one connected system. The ground moved, the crops died, the animals changed their behaviour. A ruler broke an oath, a prophet gave a warning. None of these events had to be isolated from the others. They could all be signs, and once you understand that, you understand why translating Araqiel's teaching is not as simple as it looks. The word translated as signs carries a lot of weight. A sign can be a mark, it can be an indicator, it can be evidence, it can be a warning, it can be an omen, it can be something ordinary that points to something hidden. And the meaning changes depending on the culture, the language, the religious setting, and the person claiming to interpret it. A footprint is a sign. Smoke on the horizon is a sign. Dark clouds are a sign. A crack in a wall is a sign. But so, in many ancient traditions, is an eclipse. A birth with unusual features, a river running red after a storm. A sudden collapse in the ground. The same word can stand at the border between observation and interpretation. That border is where the debate lives. There is also the problem of transmission. The Book of Enoch did not arrive in the modern world as one perfectly preserved document, written in one language and copied without variation for thousands of years. It is a collection of ancient writings, composed and transmitted across long periods of time. Much of First Enoch survives complete in Ethiopic, while fragments in Aramaic were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Greek fragments also exist. Every layer of transmission matters. A word copied from one language into another can carry several possible shades of meaning. Sometimes translators choose the closest word available. Sometimes they preserve a phrase whose original force has already become uncertain. And sometimes a short expression survives while the larger tradition that explained it disappears. Imagine finding one line from a lost textbook that says, "He taught them the language of storms." What would that mean? Meteorology, sailors' knowledge, ritual formulas predicting weather from clouds? Interpreting lightning as a divine message? Without the missing pages, certainty becomes impossible. That is the situation with Araqiel. And there is another complication. The Watcher's teachings are presented in a list. Lists are powerful, but they can also be frustrating. They give us names and categories, not full explanations. Azazel is associated with weapons and adornment. Others are associated with enchantments, stars, clouds, lunar movements, and heavenly knowledge. Araqiel's entry sits among them, but it does not tell us whether his instruction was meant to be practical, ritual, predictive, or all of those at once. The list may reflect traditions that were already old when the author recorded them. Different communities may have understood these names differently. Some details may have been obvious to the original audience and completely lost to us. That happens more often than people realize. We read ancient texts believing every mystery has an answer waiting somewhere in the footnotes. But sometimes the honest answer is that the evidence runs out. Not every door opens. Not every name comes with a key. And that does not make Araqiel less important. It may make him more revealing. Because the uncertainty itself shows us something about the world of Enoch. It was a world deeply concerned with forbidden boundaries. Knowledge was not automatically good just because it was useful. The question was, who gave it, who controlled it, and what human beings did with it after receiving it. A person who reads the land can protect a village. That same person can claim power over everyone frightened by what the land might reveal. A person who notices patterns can save lives. That same person can convince others that every disaster confirms his authority. So perhaps the warning is not that the earth has no signs. Ancient people knew, as we know, that nature leaves evidence everywhere. The warning may be about the hunger to become its ultimate interpreter, to stand before uncertainty and say, "I alone know what this means." That is a dangerous claim in any age. And Araqiel's few mysterious words leave us with one final thought. The earth beneath our feet can be studied, measured, mapped, and understood. But the moment someone claims to possess the final meaning behind every crack, every storm, every disaster, and every change in the ground, knowledge becomes something else. It becomes power. And in the Book of Enoch, power taken from forbidden teachers never stays harmless for long. And that brings us back to the 7 forbidden sciences of the Watchers. Not 7 random pieces of ancient superstition. Not 7 strange entries in a list that can be dismissed with a shrug. Together they form a map of the anxieties running through the Book of Enoch. The fear that human beings had received knowledge too powerful for them to control. Knowledge that could transform survival into violence, observation into domination, beauty into corruption, and mystery into a weapon. It began with Azazel. He taught the making of swords, knives, shields, and armor. The tools that let one human being kill another more efficiently than ever before. But he also taught adornment, metals, cosmetics, precious stones, the arts of changing appearance and creating desire. In Enoch's story, warfare and seduction stand side by side. Violence and vanity come from the same forbidden source. That is a detail worth sitting with, because the text does not imagine evil as one simple thing. It can arrive as a blade, it can arrive as a mirror. It can arrive as an object that makes someone feel powerful, beautiful, feared, or superior. Then came Semjaza, the leader of the Watchers, associated with enchantments and root cuttings. Again, the meaning is not completely clear. The phrase may point toward magic, secret rituals, healing plants, poisons, or knowledge of herbs used for purposes the text considered dangerous. A root can become medicine. It can become poison. The difference may depend on the hands holding it. Armaros taught the breaking of enchantments or counter-enchantments. And that may be one of the strangest entries in the entire list. If one Watcher teaches spells, and another teaches how to undo them, then the world of Enoch is not just worried about forbidden power. It is worried about an escalating cycle of power, a curse followed by a counter-curse. Fear creating dependence. People seeking hidden knowledge because someone else already claims to possess it. That cycle has never really disappeared. Baraqiel taught the signs of lightning. Kokabel taught the constellations. Ezeqeel taught the knowledge of clouds. Araqiel taught the signs of the earth, and suddenly the list opens outward into the whole natural world. The sky above, the storm on the horizon, the movement of stars, the changing moon, the shape of clouds, the trembling ground beneath human feet. These were not trivial matters to ancient communities. Reading the heavens could mean knowing when to travel, plant, gather, sail, or prepare for seasonal change. Reading clouds could mean recognizing a coming storm. Reading the earth could mean understanding a landscape, finding water, avoiding danger, or trying to explain disaster. But in the Book of Enoch, there is always a boundary. The issue is not simply that knowledge exists. The issue is that the Watchers cross a line by giving it to humanity. They take what the story presents as heavenly or forbidden knowledge and bring it down into a world not ready to bear its consequences. And the consequences, according to Enoch, are catastrophic. Weapons help create bloodshed. Enchantments distort human life. Astrological and celestial knowledge can become a means of claiming authority over fate. Signs in the clouds and earth can become tools for those who want to turn uncertainty into control. The knowledge itself may not always be portrayed as evil in every possible sense, but knowledge mixed with pride, greed, violence, and the desire for power becomes destructive very quickly. That may be the deeper warning behind the Watchers. Not never learn, but be careful what you believe knowledge entitles you to do, because every age has its Watchers. Not necessarily fallen angels descending on Mount Hermon, but people, institutions and systems offering power through secrets, promising that if you just possess the right hidden information, the right technique, the right formula, the right weapon, the right reading of the stars, you can rise above everyone else. You can control the future, you can control fear, you can control other people, and that is where ancient Enoch still feels surprisingly modern. We have more knowledge now than any ancient civilization could have imagined. We can split atoms, edit genes, map distant galaxies, predict storms, study earthquakes, and send machines beyond the edge of the solar system. But the old question remains exactly the same. What happens when our power grows faster than our wisdom? The Book of Enoch does not give an easy answer. It gives a story of rebellion, corrupted knowledge, judgment, and a world thrown out of balance. Scholars continue to debate how its individual passages should be translated and understood. The Watchers themselves belong to a complicated ancient tradition, shaped by theology, myth, and the fears of the communities that preserved these writings. But whether you read this story as literal history, symbolic warning, ancient mythology, or something in between, its central tension is hard to escape. Knowledge can save. Knowledge can heal. Knowledge can reveal the wonders of creation. But knowledge can also become a weapon when it is separated from responsibility. And perhaps that is why these 7 teachings were remembered. Not because the ancient writers were afraid of every star, every cloud, every plant, every tool, or every sign in the earth. They were afraid of human beings receiving power without humility. So, which of these forbidden sciences do you find most unsettling? Azazel's weapons and adornment, Semjaza's roots and enchantments, Armaros's counterspells, the Watchers who taught humanity to search the lightning clouds, constellations, moon and earth for hidden meaning. Let us know in the comments, and tell us again where you are listening from. It is always incredible to see how far these ancient stories travel from one part of the world to another, thousands of years after they were first written down. If you enjoyed this journey into the Book of Enoch, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next mystery. And if you listen on Spotify, your support there means a great deal too. The Spotify link is in the description. And if these ancient questions have left you wanting more, take a look at our book on 12 unexplained mysteries available through the website. The link is in the description, because the Watchers may have been bound beneath the earth in Enoch's vision. But the question they left behind is still above us, below us, and inside us. What should human beings do with the power to know?